Our last lesson ended on page 724, and I wanted to point something out really quickly before we move on. And number 7 said to select all the shapes that always have pairs of perpendicular sides. Now, I said, of course, a rectangle and a square, because those are always have 90-degree angles. Now, we came across this word parallelogram, and a parallelogram is defined as an object that has whose opposite sides are parallel. So that could mean that the object is a rectangle, and it could mean that the object is a square. But when we look at a rhombus also, and let me show you a rhombus in today's lesson. So a rhombus also has opposite sides that are parallel. So if a rectangle, a square, and a rhombus are all parallelograms, then a parallelogram cannot always have pairs of perpendicular sides, only sometimes. So it depends on the parallelogram that you're talking about as to whether or not it always has perpendicular sides. So now we're going to move into today's lesson, which is lesson 33, session 3, and I'm on page 727. And this word problem or situation says a classroom computer game shows a set of categories and a set of shapes. The players put each shape in the correct category. Draw a line from each shape to the category it belongs to. So which objects have acute angles only? When we think of acute, we're going to think triangles. So I'm going to look at each of these angles, and I can tell that they're all acute. So I'm going to draw a line from D to acute. Which objects have right angles only? And I like how this is already defined for us by the red right angles. So F is the only one with right angles only. Which objects have acute and right angles? So this triangle here has a right angle and 2 acute angles. So we're going right there. And then which objects have acute and obtuse? So this is acute, acute, obtuse, obtuse. That one. This is acute, acute, obtuse, obtuse. And then we have the same obtuse, obtuse, acute. I'm going to put A's on those, acute. So over there. So more of these had acute and obtuse. So we've been learning how to classify two-dimensional objects based on their sides, and now we're going to consider more their angles. So I'm moving on to page 728. And one way that we can classify two-dimensional objects based on their angles is that this says that you can use something as a model for a right angle, and you can use the corner of your paper as a right angle in order to compare whether or not the angles are acute and obtuse. So, and then what I started to do at the end was the model. It says you can actually label the drawing to help sort the shapes based on angle. So on this trapezoid right here, we see that there's an obtuse, obtuse, acute, and acute angle. So it has 2 acute and 2 obtuse angles. I'm moving on to page 729. So look at the parallelograms A and B. Check that you have drawn lines to the correct groups. Do the parallelograms belong to the same group? So we're going to look back at what we drew. And remember, a parallelogram has 4 sides, but it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. So this is a parallelogram because we have side, and side that are parallel. And these 2 rhombuses are also parallelograms. And they do not go to the same category here because the rhombus goes to acute and obtuse, whereas the square goes to right angles only. So I'm going to say, do the parallelograms belong to the same group? Explain. No, because the rectangle has 4 90-degree or right angles. So look at the 2 triangles. Check that you have drawn lines to match the triangles with their groups. Describe the angles in each triangle. when we look at those triangles, we see that D had an acute, an acute, and an acute, whereas C has a right angle, an acute, and an acute. So this one goes to acute and right, and this one, this triangle goes to acute only. So one triangle has one acute, or we'll call that one, which one is that? Triangle C. C triangle has one right angle, two acute, and then triangle D has three acute angles. Look at the trapezoid and rectangle, which has right angles only. That's going to be the rectangle. To which group does the trapezoid belong? Remember, the trapezoid is going to be this object here, E, and we have an obtuse, obtuse, acute, acute angle. So this one is going to belong to acute and obtuse. Explain how to sort shapes based on whether they have acute, right, or obtuse angles. Well, you would first look at the angles. And I would look for right angles first. And I would identify those. I'm going to put ID for identify, ID the right angles. And then second, I would look for acute angles. Then ID those, and you can write A. And then number 3, I'm going to look for obtuse angles. And ID those. So let's move on and go through some examples, page 730. Which of these groups does the rhombus belong in? Acute angles only, obtuse angles only, right angles only, both acute and obtuse, or both right and obtuse? So we know it's a rhombus, therefore there are no right angles. So we can go ahead and eliminate that one right there. And they can't be acute angles only, because that would give us basically a triangle. It's going to be your only option there with a parallelogram, a four-sided object. So now we're going to look at the other angles. So I can tell by looking at this angle right here that it is an obtuse angle. It is greater than 90 degrees. And I'm going to use my paper. Well, it's kind of hard to tell on this one, this angle here, because it's not translucent, but I can use my protractor. And I can see that because this goes at an angle, this might be around a 70-degree angle. So that is not a right angle, and it is actually an acute angle. This would be obtuse and acute. So this one belongs to the, and there's no right angles only, both acute and obtuse angle category. Circle the shape that has an acute angle, a right angle, and an obtuse angle. So let's look, I'm going to look for the right angle first. I know that this one is out. This does have a right angle. And this one has 2 right angles. This one has 4. So I've got the right angle. And remember, we're circling the shape. And an obtuse angle. Well, I know that rectangles have no obtuse angles, so this one is out. And I can see my obtuse angle right here. So I've got that. And then my acute angle is going to be this last angle right here. And I'm going to circle that as my answer. So for number 8, it says, the shapes below have been sorted into 2 groups based on their angles. Explain how the shapes could have been sorted. So how else can they be sorted? Let's first see how they're sorted. Do you guys understand how they've been sorted? Well, they've been sorted, like it said, by their angles, and it looks like we have group 1 as right angles. And then group 2, it could just say no right angles. No right angle. That's the sign for angle. What else could it say? How is this one categorized? Well, if I look, remember, our trapezoid is going to have obtuse, 2 obtuse, and 2 acute. We have a rhombus here, very similar. It's going to have obtuse, obtuse, acute, acute. And then we have this triangle here, with an obtuse and then 2 acute. So this group is going to be obtuse and acute. Now the shapes could have also been sorted, what we learned in our last lesson, based on their sides. So we could have sorted them by parallel sides, and we would see that this one has parallel sides, this one has at least one parallel side, and this one. And so the 2 triangles would then not have any parallel sides, and then those would be in a different category if we were to regroup them by sides. And now you're ready to complete page 731 and 732.